Alright, this is the second part in what is currently a two-part game dev session for my Pikmin prototype, where I'm recreating Pikmin in the Unity game engine. On the last game dev session, I implemented the plucking mechanic most of the way. What was left at the end of the previous episode was the ability to cancel the pluck, which I have already done, and fixing a weird bug that showed up in the last one where certain sprouts couldn't be plucked, which I also fixed. And then what I'm going to do in this episode is the ability for multiple leaders to actually assist in the plucking like they do in the games with multiple leaders, which has so far been 2/3 of them, at least the main series ones. I haven't played any of the spin-offs. But anyway, like I said, in between the previous episode and the current one, I have done some stuff, and I had that recorded, but the recording ended up being really noisy and unpleasant to listen to, so I went ahead and scrapped it. As for the bug was that you were able to pluck sprouts while they were falling to the ground, which reminds me, I also need to change the time it takes for them to fall from 10 seconds back to 2.6. And doing so made it to where they weren't technically sprouts anymore, yet they were still in the ground, so you couldn't pluck them out of the ground. And also you could actually run at sprouts that hadn't even planted yet, so that was also removed. And canceling them was just as simple as making a new case for when you're in the plucking animation. The B button is changed from whistling to canceling the pluck. So those are the things that I did. It ended up being about 10 or 15 minutes of recording, I think. But yeah. So, like I said, we now need the other leaders to assist in the plucking. And I'm not entirely sure how to go about that just yet. Give me a second to think about it. Okay, what I'm realizing is I'm editing terrain for some reason. Okay, what I actually realized is that there is already logic for plucking, but as I mentioned in the previous video, it was only processed if the leader is player controlled, because this script is actually on two other game objects, the two other leaders, and there are certain things that should only happen if it's under the control of the player. And I mentioned that might come up later, and it's coming up now. So I need some very special case where a leader can be in the process of plucking, but without being player controlled. And so, seeing that this is currently under the player-controlled if statement, we've got plucking logic right here. I don't really want to duplicate the logic, but it might not be too bad. This finds... Okay, that finds the Pikmin you're about to throw. If we're not plucking, then it just finds the closest sprout that is actually within range of being plucked. And if we're not under the onion and we're not plucking the sprout, we can throw. Otherwise, if we're actually trying to pluck a Pikmin because we're in range to do so and we're pressing the button, then we'll enter that state. Then there are these mutually exclusive states, one of which being plucking, which ends up right here. The only action that you can do there is canceling it. And canceling won't be able to be done by the other leaders, but you canceling should broadcast that intent to the other two leaders. So I don't know if there's a clean way to do this without just duplicating some code. So I'm just going to reprocess this, reinterpret this from the perspective of a leader that is not under player control. And that code would go in this block. So when I actually do go to start plucking some Pikmin, that happens right there. So I think what I should actually do is I should encapsulate this in its own very special function that I'll go ahead and just put right before the update function. And not only will that function go ahead and set the appropriate variable to be true, it will also alert... Why is this a problem? Oh, okay. It will also alert the other leaders that are following this leader to also do the same. Now, that means, how do I know what leaders are following me? Alright, it looks like I have a very convenient list right here called leaders following me, and that is actually serialized, interestingly enough. So that exists right there. It's accessible to me. It's not a local variable. So leaders following me is what we're interested in, and I don't think that would include me. I don't know why I suddenly had that concern, but that doesn't really make any sense. One thing I realized I could do is for each of the leaders that are following me, I could call their pluck function as well, which would put that in that, or put them in that state, but that wouldn't give them any sprout to pluck. They'd have to come up with it on their own. But I think they naturally do that if they're in the process of plucking Pikmin in a chain. Now, just to make sure, like in the code right here, where if they're player controlled, okay, again, that's also player controlled. Actually, wait. No, this actually has nothing to do with whether or not they're controlled by the player. So if they're actually in the process of plucking, which is what this block is, I'm pretty sure, then they'll already be trying to go towards a sprout. So just in case, like for example in this case that I'm going to trigger now because I've added that new function, if for some reason they don't have a sprout, we'll go ahead and find one for them. And again, this could only ever happen, this block, if they're already plucking, so we don't need to set plucking to true. Okay, that's that. It's pretty simple. What else is there? Is this all there is? I feel like I'm forgetting something really obvious, which I probably am, like, well, the rest of the functionality, like the ability for me canceling to spread to them. Oh, and also that code that was... How much actually is exclusive? We're going to find out. We're going to find out how much code actually doesn't run if they're not player controlled. So go ahead and put that into the onion. And dismissing them is actually going to... So I'll just keep them with me. What happens if I do this? Nothing. Okay. They might be trying to go after the sprout that I'm going after, or, of course, there's the possibility that none of this is even working at all. So what I'm going to do, just to make sure this function is even being called, just debug log with the name of the leader that it's being called on. And that'll be a really simple thing to diagnose. Alright, we're ready to see if anything is working at all. Okay, one of them said leader 3, so yeah, that did actually get called on all of them. So, okay, this is the function that's getting called on them, which forces them to be in the plucking state. And, okay, if player controlled, now that's automatically going to be false. Else if is following, okay, which they are. So, okay. Should this actually be in an else statement? Because this is the branch they're going to go into if they're following me. So, I want to use this code again, but I want it to... If I do or plucking, then this code could get called on the currently player-controlled leader, which is absolutely not what we want, but what we could do is something like this, and this no longer needs to be else if not. Just if we're a leader that is following somebody. Actually, if I would automatically go to that one. Okay, but unless I'm plucking. Okay, so if is following, but this code right here should get called no matter what, at least in this block. I broke something. Okay. Which that code should go here. Let's just in case. Plucking logic. Okay. Now let's try it again. Alright, so I know for a fact that... Oh, okay. That was interesting. They just immediately started plucking, but I didn't tell them to. So, okay. I need to make sure this only happens if they are plucking. I forgot that that's a new thing. I should also make sure that I can even still pluck Pikmin myself now that I've moved that code. I mean, based on that little, based on the new condition it has, I should be able to. So just to make sure. Alright, I can still pluck, right? Yeah, okay, that's good. Now let's try it with multiple leaders. I've went ahead and moved them much closer. I've moved everything a lot closer, actually, so that hopefully whenever I'm doing this stuff behind the scenes, it'll go much faster. So let's go ahead and move these guys over here. Have some other leaders with me. And just start. That worked almost too well, actually. That was impressive how well that worked. By how well that worked, I mean it even worked at all. So there's still the problem of they could obviously, well, keep plucking if I cancel it, because that doesn't get broadcast to them yet. But for it to be easiest to see, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to make it to where I can start with more than 10 Pikmin. In fact, I'll start with 20, so that I can go ahead and get that 20 pellet, which is going to give us a lot more Pikmin. Red onion. So the way this works, the stored Pikmin are in an array on the onion, and of course they have identities. I, for some reason, arbitrarily decided that I want to know the actual identities of the Pikmin and have them be continuous, so that, like, if you theoretically wanted to, you could know if you still have the Pikmin that you started with, you know, and at any time. I mean, there's no practical purpose for that, but that's what I decided. And it hasn't really caused any problems yet, but I could just go ahead and have them carry that back. Where are they going with it? Oh, okay, they're just going around a little bit. They stopped moving. Well, this is an interesting problem. They have stopped moving. They can't go at all. Are they vibrating in place? They are vibrating in place. Okay. Why are they doing that? Alright, so that took a while. It turns out it just had to slightly tweak how it determines whether or not it's reached a waypoint. And so now, instead of figuring out whether or not it's reached a waypoint, it figures out whether or not it reaches... Well, it's... I won't go into it too much, but I guess, yeah, it's working now. That was really weird. And, yeah, the point of this was to be able to make more Pikmin at once so I could test the cancel feature and test it, well, presumably not working. So I canceled, and they're still going. Alright, so that, again, should be pretty simple. Here's the carry controller. I'll go a little bit into detail about what was going on. So, in order to fix a problem where Pikmin could backtrack if the nearest node actually took them further from the destination, I changed their pathfinding behavior from actually following the waypoints to following a specially calculated point. And it turned out I needed to calculate their distance to that target point to determine whether they'd reached a waypoint or not, rather than the waypoint itself. So that's working now, and now I can move on to canceling. So like I did with the plucking, moving that to its own special function, I'll make a cancel pluck function. Copy the name to make that easier, and also put the function by the other one, and make sure not to I accidentally put a backslash there. Make sure not to forget the void keyword this time. Cancel pluck, and, you know, bare minimum set plucking to false. And again, loop through all the leaders probably, and also probably do their cancel pluck functions. So yeah, that was hopefully really simple. Let's see if it worked. If it did, which this was the thing that I intended to do with this episode, then maybe this episode will be over. And if it's short enough, I might move on to something else. Otherwise, then this will probably be the end. How long is it now? It is 12:45. I don't know what OBS decided to do when I did that. Maybe it captured my desktop, or it switched to Visual Studio since the window wasn't technically in focus. Wait, can I not? Oh, I can. He was just close enough to follow me. Never mind. Well, I say he, but these leaders currently have no gender, and the cancel worked. Do they no longer pluck? Oh, they do. Actually, you know what? Let's try and make them a little bit more intelligent. They'll just go after the closest sprout. So what I should actually do is I should make them a little smarter so they won't go after a sprout that's already being plucked by the leader. So that should be a pretty simple thing. I can do a private Boolean function that returns whether or not a sprout is actually being plucked by a leader. Plucking sprout, pass the sprout in question, and just return whether or not that sprout equals the plucking sprout. And of course, if the plucking sprout's null, the only thing that would equal it is null, and they're never going to check for a null Pikmin unless there's a null sprout, which should never happen. So this should be good. Which means I need to change the get closest sprout function, and it should only ever ignore... Okay, do they know which leader they're following? I think they do. So, okay. That means if they're not player controlled, we want to do a slightly different thing. Am I just gonna copy this? No, let's not copy it. Do I just want to extend this already really long thing? You know what? Sure. Just extend the already really long if statement. Put it on a new line. And again. And actually, let's put each one on a new line. So if I remember right, the pattern is if player controlled. Where did I had it somewhere, but I don't anymore. If player controlled, or so if player controlled is false, then the second condition has to be true. And that condition would be that not... So if we're not player controlled, or... So that would be... We'd be following a leader, right? So that's a property. Alright, good. If following leader... So, and following leader dot is plucking sprout the current sprout we're looking at. And the reason I'm checking this is because I don't want to call this on a leader that's null, and following leader is going to be null if we're not actually following someone. But just to make sure this won't completely wreck their logic, player controlled will only be false if it's a leader that's not being controlled. And if they're not even following me, then I don't really have to worry about whether or not I'm messing with their plucking logic, because if they're not following me, they have no reason to pluck on their own. Of course, I think in Pikmin 3, if you throw a leader at a group of sprouts, they will start plucking them. But I personally greatly dislike the ability to throw leaders, and I think I'm not going to include it. But let's just make sure that worked. One of the main reasons I hate the throwing leader mechanic so much is because of how many times I've accidentally thrown leaders when trying to throw Pikmin. And of course, they're completely helpless if they're out in the field. They just run away from any enemies and also audibly complain now. So that's fun. Anyway, my nitpicks of Pikmin 3 aside. Oh, I thought it came out as a bud. It was just shimmering in the light. Okay. We are plucking, and they now no longer even pluck. And I'm stuck trying to pluck a sprout that's under a pellet. That's beautiful. Okay. So, interesting. What am I doing wrong? Player controlled. If that's true, then... Okay, so it's true for me, and it's obviously not affecting my plucking ability, so that's fine. But if not, then it'll evaluate this or following leader So they are following me, and how many times do I gotta say it? I reversed the logic again. And my dog's barking at something. That's fine. Huh. Yeah, like I said, probably fine. So, get 20 Pikmin again. Actually, no, that's going to make 10, right? Why do I still have the 10 instead of the 20? Oh, yeah, because I was seeing... Oh, is it maybe the weight of the pellet that's breaking it? No, it was just breaking no matter what. So, what was I testing again? Oh, yeah, they should be smart now. And... Okay, they are, to an extent. But again, they still might potentially go after sprouts that other leaders are going after. So, that's the next thing. So far, so good. They're doing a really good job so far. I'm just going to go ahead and put that 20 back, which means getting rid of that and putting that back. Alright, making sure to save often. So, this might be a little bit more complicated. So, I'm going to do something a little bit smarter. So what I want to do is, if following leader, and also this should only ever happen if we're not player controlled. If not player controlled and we're following a leader, we also know which leaders are following the leader, so we can loop through those leaders. So L would be less than following leader dot leaders following me dot count, because it's a list. And again, we ignore it if the leader is ourselves. That would be L, right? Don't make the mistake of indexing it with I, which I've done a lot. That's a really annoying bug, because it's a typo, effectively. Not equal to this, because this is a leader script. Then, what I can do... How do I want to set this up? So, bool can pluck sprout equals true. It'll default to that. So what I'll do is, if this particular leader is plucking a sprout, or plucking the sprout that we want, then we actually want, okay, can pluck sprout equals false, and we want to break out of this loop, and actually, let's go ahead and initialize this and set it to true, is can pluck sprout equals, so, if we can't pluck the sprout, actually if we could theoretically pluck the sprout, go ahead and see if no one else is. But then once we're done with all that, if we can't, then just completely ignore this sprout and move on to the next one. Which means this new condition is completely useless now, because we have already established that. So run through it again, just for a sanity check, make sure I'm not doing this wrong. So we initially, in order to figure out whether or not we can pluck the sprout, is can pluck sprout equals not player controlled, actually. So if we are player controlled, actually, hold on, can pluck sprout equals, well, player controlled, true. But if player controlled is false, then or we have to, the leader we're following can't be plucking the sprout, is what that means, right? So if we think we can because the leader's not, go ahead and loop through all of the other leaders. And the instant that another leader, that's not us of course, is trying to pluck that sprout, we say that we can't, we break out, then we check if after all of that, if we have determined that someone else is trying to pluck it, we don't even bother trying and just look for a new one. So this should do it. Let's go ahead and test it. How long is this video so far? It is 24 minutes. Wow, okay. How do these episodes get so long? Probably because I talk so much. So, okay. Go ahead and bring the 20 pellet over. This is a part I might want to skip. Alright, let's test their new artificial intelligence. Is it working? The blue one seems to be confused. The green one was doing fine. So, okay, let's run that test one more time. Alright, let's give it another go. Yeah, okay, they're definitely all doing their thing. It's just that sometimes they get stuck behind one another. Again, that was surprisingly pretty fast. I feel like that could be countered with some really basic rudimentary pathfinding. Actually, instead of making them solid, I am going to showcase a special kind of collider. Well, it's not technically collider, it's exactly what I call it, which is a force field. And I noticed in Pikmin 1 and 2 that certain objects, especially the ones that can move, don't actually have solid collision. They have, like, kind of forcey, magnet-like, non-solid collision. And so I kind of emulated that for certain things where that actually helped. And for cases where I really didn't want solid collision. And it's worked pretty nice so far. So what I actually want to do is make it to where leaders don't actually interact with each other physically. That would be in the project settings under physics. And we've got this cool looking triangle thing. It's leader, right? There's a... Oh, player. Never mind. Player. Players should not collide with each other. Instead, they should each have a force field, which I can add. Oh, they already have a force field. And interact with others. So if I did that right, that was actually really quick, then do I even collide with them anymore? No. Bad. Okay. Why not? Because their force fields have no force. 13 seems like a good value. Alright. No. So, what am I doing wrong? So, they can interact with others. They do have force. Maybe I just need to... I don't know. I'm just trying random stuff right now. Because this works for other things. Usually. Nope. Okay. Not whatsoever. Nothing at all. Okay. It's probably actually a side of... Let's put that back to 13. That's probably a side effect of the leader's movement code. So, where does it actually calculate? Because what I do is, if you have a force field component, you can pass it your desired velocity and it will return the allowed velocity based on collisions with all other force fields. So even if you're standing still, it may want you to get pushed out of something. So I need to figure out where it applies. Does it apply it anywhere? Excuse me? Does it actually even apply it? Did I just have a complete and utter lapse of judgment and not... Oh, wait. Motion. Force field. That. Okay. It's right there. And... Okay, and it's using my force field. My force field right here is leader 1. That's leader 2. That's leader 3. So far, so good. And the get final velocity, I should, in theory, be moved by these other things, and it has the correct radius and all that, right? Where does it show up at? Okay, I can kind of see it. Like this line that continues upwards would not come from the capsule collider, and I don't have mesh colliders. So it's got to be that. And the interact with others should be working. I could turn their agent status off, which might be bad. I think they need to be agents, because I think that means they're things that can... Yeah, look how weird that looks. And if I walk into... That's definitely wrong and bad. Let's turn interact with others off. I feel like it might be compounding some things. And I also really feel like I should probably be an agent. Operation is not valid for an... Okay, no. They need to be agents. I made that for a reason. It needs to be agents. And interact with others is... I also put there specifically. So the pellets can actually interact with each other. But for some reason, my leaders cannot. So real quick, I'm going to just do some debug draw line stuff and figure out why. Alright, so it now draws a red line in my direction whenever I'm moving. And it should be the same for other leaders. So once I actually intersect with... Okay, so it's not registering that they should even be pushing each other apart. Like the other ones isn't even registering. So, okay. That seems like it must be a problem in the force field.getFinalVelocity function. If I look at that, if we're not enabled, return velocity in, makes sense. If we're not an agent, we want to completely skip that because we are. If we are, velocity out equals velocity in as an initialization, I guess. Int overlaps, I'm guessing that's how many things it overlaps. So that loops through all force field. Wait a minute. So those are interacting agent. Wait, do I have this completely reversed? Wait, hold on a second. Do I at least have some code comments somewhere to explain what... Because agents mean they're moving, right? Isn't that how I set that up? If I check a force field for like a 20 pellet, and I look at the collision F, which stands for force field, it's not an agent. Oh, wait, I think agents are the characters, like the actual, like the leaders in Pikmin. Because if I look at a Pikmin, they have a force field somewhere, right? And they're also agents. Agents are the characters that are supposed to collide with the force fields. I never made intercollision between agents. Do I actually store? Okay. That means I need to make a specific list for agent force fields. So go ahead and add, so that will remove this from agent force fields. Otherwise, if we are an agent, so we need to add this to agent force fields if we are an agent. And then, so that loops through all of that. Pretty standard stuff. Okay. So now, if we are an agent, which is what we'd have to be for in this case, if interact with others... Wait, does this already add us to a very special... It does technically. That should be fine. If interact with others, run through that loop again, except with agent force fields. So if agent force fields I dot interact with others, so yeah, actually, yeah, else if I need to do this smartly. If we're not an agent and we interact with others, then we have a very specific place we need to go. Interact with others for non-agents should be specifically there. And IntelliSense, I appreciate... What? Why can I not... Okay, there we go. Visual Studio is weird sometimes. So, yeah, I have a very specific array that I want these to be in. So, this agent force fields list should only contain agents that are allowed to interact with each other. That should not include the Pikmin, since I haven't set that property on them. Because I don't want them to do that. I already have their own code for keeping them from overlapping with other Pikmin. That's way less strict, but it still does the job. And it was also written before force fields existed, so... Does my game even still work after this? So far, so good. Can I even interact with these pellets? Yes, I can. Alright, and if I move over to one of my friends... It does push them out of the way. Alright, so... And... Going back to this, the pushing force seems to be kind of dramatic. So if not agent, okay. But if we are, this is running through all the force fields. This will not include agent force fields. So just to make that clear, I should rename this to non-agent force fields, just so I know for a fact, and make sure there isn't any case where. Okay, good. We can collapse this. I don't need that. I know this video is getting long, but we're actually almost done. Overlaps. The force... Okay, the radius is... Yeah, we square the radius. And the force vector... That seems fine, so I just might need to reduce the force that the leaders push on each other with. And it might just be fine. So I think I used 7 for smaller, less assertive objects, and 13 for really solid objects. Those are the values that seem to work. Yes, that's beautiful. Okay. So, if they follow me, they're not going to push me around, right? Yeah, they don't even get close enough to do that. Alright, and I pushed them out of the way, which is exactly what I wanted, and that worked really... Wait, what if they're, like, right next to each other and following me? Little strange. They jitter sometimes. I'll get to that in a second. Well, okay, yeah. I was about to say, it didn't look like it was moving, so... Yep, they interact with me just fine. I can push them out of the way. The ball can push them out of the way. But they interact with each other and kind of jitter, which is strange. Maybe I need to turn up the pushing force, or actually maybe I need to turn it down, actually. So here's all of these Pikmin that I can just dismiss over here, bring the leaders with me. Now, let's start plucking Pikmin. Alright. You know, with my standard being how this mechanic behaves in Pikmin 3, I'd say I got it to my liking. The only issue I currently have is the jittering that leaders that are following me have. And again, that could really probably be solved by turning the force down. They don't need to interact with each other that forcefully. But if it's not forceful enough, I could just practically walk through them. Okay, that's already looking... Well, actually, almost the same. Yeah, that's much better, actually. That looks almost perfect. Alright. I think I've accomplished what I've wanted to accomplish. The other leaders, and I can still push them around, can help me with plucking. Plucking actually functions as a mechanic, and I can cancel it whenever I want, which also makes the other leaders cancel. So all in all, I accomplished what I set out to do, and all it took was 2 almost 40-minute videos. I was not expecting that, but if you did make it this far, thank you so much for watching. I may do more game dev sessions for this in the future. That ball just went right through that pellet. It's fine. I may do more game dev sessions like this in the future, but I don't currently know. This was all I really had planned. But yeah, thanks for watching, and bye.